Good evening and welcome. My name is Ginger Fay and I'm one of the directors at Appleruth Tutoring Services. We are a tutoring and test prep company and we love working with students, helping them achieve their goals academically and personally. I'm thrilled to be joined tonight by a wonderful friend and colleague, Sarbeth. Thank you so much, Sarbeth, for being with us. You all are in for a treat tonight. Sarbeth has seen this process from so many different schools and perspectives, and she is here to answer your questions over the next hour. So I hope you'll pop them into the Q&A box as they occur to you, and we will try to squeeze as many into the next hour as we possibly can. First of all, we'd love to know a little bit more about you. So we're going to do a quick poll to see, to try and get to know our audience a little bit better so we can be sure that we're directing our comments to be most helpful for you. So if you can let us know if you're a student, parent, or an educator and where in this process your student might be, we would be delighted to know a little bit more about you. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about Sarbeth as we get started. So let me tell you, Sarbeth has over 20 years of experience in this education space. She's currently Associate Dean of Admission at Emory. She also serves on the board of directors at SACAC, which is an organization that college admissions officers and college counselors belong to. She got her BA in political science from Winston-Salem State and both a JD in law and an MA in African American studies from Ohio State. Go Buckeyes. And in her previous work experience, Sarbeth has held many different admissions in the admissions positions, including Davidson College, the U.S. Coast Guard Academy. She was director of MBA admissions at Clark Atlanta, and she worked at the law school at Ohio State as well. She also spent, I think, maybe the last 6 or 7 years on the other side of the desk, as we call it, at the Westminster Schools in Atlanta before joining the admissions team at Emory. So thank you so much, Sarbeth, for sharing your good thoughts and wisdom and experience with our audience tonight. I'm grateful for it. So we're going to dive right in. I think we finished the poll and we can jump a little bit forward. Oh dear. Okay. What is happening? Oh, goodness gracious. We're going to stop share for a hot second. The poll was kind of taking up a little spot.
Well, Ginger, while you're pulling that up, I will just say I am so happy to be here this evening. And like one thing, I used to be a teacher, right? And so I love questions because I want to make sure that we are utilizing your time effectively. So if you have questions, please make sure you use the Q&A box. So that way we can make sure that we try to get as many questions answered as possible.
Thank you. That's really our goal tonight, I think, is to kind of introduce folks to the college admissions process, the glossary of terms that we use in this space and in this work, answer your questions, and think a little bit about the next steps that would be appropriate for the families that are joining us tonight. So Sarbeth, if you want to get us started just talking a little bit about college application review, what things are important, what counts in this process?
Absolutely. There are so many different factors when it comes to admissions. And as someone who has seen the process, Ginger mentioned, from the college side, small, liberal arts, large institutions, working at the high school, working at an independent school, working from a community-based organization, and currently a parent going through this process with my own child. I wish there was a Willy Wonka golden ticket, right? I wish there was a way to say, if you do X, Y, and Z, you automatically will get into A, B, and C. That is not the case. There are so many different factors, and you can see them on the screen. But the great thing about these factors, not all colleges consider them. Some colleges look at demonstrated interest, meaning, did you come to campus? Did you participate in our virtual programs? When an admissions recruiter came to your high school, did you go and meet with them? Some schools really factor that in, other schools don't. Other schools doesn't make a difference one way or the other. But the one commonality that every single applicant has in this process is your transcript. Your transcript is yours, is a tool that you have complete control over. And so the very first thing, and you can see on this slide, this is a survey of hundreds of colleges, but the top factor was grades in your courses, because you have the power, your children have the power to say which classes that they want to take and what classes they can be successful in. And so taking those classes and really paying attention to what is the story that my transcript is telling the colleges, that's by far the most important part. We'll talk about the other factors later, but keep in mind your transcript is something that every single person in the applicant pool will have. Now, when you're looking at certain colleges, colleges that are deemed as highly selective, right? Having typically less than 25% of an acceptance rate of their pool, your choices in classes. I literally just sat down with my daughter yesterday and we mapped out her class schedule for next year in high school. What are the classes that are offered? As a parent, what did I do? I printed out her course curriculum. I read through it. I figured out the flow chart. If she starts with this math class, what's their trajectory throughout her high school curriculum? And so really paying attention to what courses are offered and what's my student, what is my, I'll keep saying daughter because I have a daughter, what is my daughter interested in? Just because they offer ultimately AP physics or they offer intro to engineering, if that's not her passion, that's nice that they offer for other students. So paying attention to the courses, what courses are offered and which courses should my child take? And then academic achievement. I say this all the time, just because the classes are there, if you know you won't be successful, and success, you can define it a lot of different ways. Some people define success as all A's. Some people say mostly A's. I worked with a student 1 year, loved him to death. He said, Miss Fleming, if I can get 1 A a semester, that's a win for me. And as long as his family was okay with that was a win, 1 A a semester, that is fine. So however you define success, you want to make sure that you're successful with the class offerings. You don't want to take all advanced classes and make straight C's and D's, right? Because that shows that you really didn't do the research with the classes. And then standardized testing. We'll talk about that a little later. But that is something that a lot of schools have in common. So those are the numbers part of the application. The other parts that's more subjective, extracurricular, letters of recommendations, essays. I will say with extracurricular activity, back when I applied to college, they had 3 categories: academics, athletics, and other. That was it. You either academic, athletic, or other. Now there's over 20 plus categories. There's cultural, there's internship, there's family responsibilities, there's church, there's dance. There's so many different categories for your extracurriculars. So when you're thinking about your extracurriculars and parents, I can tell you, I remember them so much more than my daughter does, because I remember having to take off of work or having to pay a fee or what have you. Sit down. That can be a fun family activity, just to think about all of the extracurricular activities that you may want to list. One activity is not more important than the other when it comes to, oh, should I let a college know that? If you don't tell the college the extracurricular activities, we're just going to assume that you're sitting and looking at Netflix or Hulu, because that's what I do a lot. So let us know what you're doing. And then letters of recommendations, what I will say about that, ask teachers, can you write me a strong letter recommendation, right? I mentioned I was a teacher before. My mom retired from teaching. My 3 brothers are all teachers, right? And so you want to make sure that the teacher can write you a strong letter recommendation. And if they hesitate, that is okay. Thank you so much. But as a student, I will say now, if you know that you fall, I'm sure no one on this webinar does it, but if your friends fall asleep in class, they're late, they're disruptive, you might want to, suggest this may not be the teacher you want to write a letter recommendation for you. So knowing that, particularly in your junior year, one of those teachers, two of those teachers may be asked to write a letter recommendation for you. You want to make sure that you're giving them the positive factors and attributes so they can write a strong letter for you. Okay. So some things have changed. Some things have not. What hasn't changed? We are going through a global pandemic, and there's a lot of changes with the college process, right? But the things that have not changed, the transcript. The classes are still the same. You may have to take the classes on a different platform, but to simply say, I didn't do well in this class because it was on Zoom, someone else in that class did well, and they were also on Zoom. So you can't use it as an excuse. Now, there's a difference between an explanation, right? If you were taking a class on Zoom and maybe your family didn't have internet resources, or there was a glitch or that's an explanation. But just to simply say, oh, it was on Zoom and I don't like Zoom, that's not really an explanation, that's an excuse. So transcripts are still important. Balancing those higher level rigorous classes, if it's honors, if it's AP, if it's advanced, if your school has IB, some schools have AP and IB, some schools don't have any. So paying attention to that piece, really make sure that you are doing well. And research, the schools are there. There are over 4,000 colleges in the US. I used to say students sometimes would get so caught up, and families would get so caught up in what I call sweatshirt schools, right? You wanted to wear the sweatshirt. You wanted to let everyone know your son or daughter or child attended this school. But is this a great fit for you? So making sure that you're really doing the research. I used to have my students tell me the attributes of schools without telling me the name of schools. What are you looking for in a school? And you can't give me a name, because you need to make sure that you're paying attention to what's offered there.
I love that advice. Thank you, Sarabeth. I love it. Tell us a little bit, we've talked a lot, we hear a lot about in the media and the news about sort of, the disruptions of COVID and what's, what's different now and that students and families are wrestling with. So what are some of the things that you're seeing as having impacts on students going through this process?
Some of the things that I see, and one thing I want to make sure that people understand is that, and I was reading applications earlier, right before I jumped on to this webinar. High schools will tell us what happened during the COVID times at your school. So high schools will say, we went pass-fail, we were hybrid, we were completely virtual. So don't worry about that piece. So a lot of a lot of high schools went pass-fail. You don't have to explain that to us because the high school told us, and everyone else in your class went pass-fail. So don't feel that that is a negative if that's the way that your school decided to go. Extracurricular activities were limited. That is true. But I will also say some people became brand ambassadors, right? I've seen that a lot. And I was like, oh, how do I get onto that? But brand ambassadors, some students created Zooms where they started tutoring programs or YouTube channels for tutoring programs. So even though the traditional type of extracurricular activities may have been limited, being innovative, what else can I do to express this passion that I have? And so that is something to keep in mind. And then, of course, the not being able to visit schools. We were shut down for a while at Emory, and we are still slowly getting back into a full visit program. Take advantage of the virtual opportunities. So many colleges had to beef up their virtual programs. And I know it's hard. People are saying, oh, well, I never got to see this school. Keep in mind, there's people who are applying internationally all the time. I went to a college international in South Africa for a program. I never saw the school. I went online, I did the virtual tours, I sat through panels. And so the virtual space has been there for years, if not decades, well, actually decades, because I did it. But colleges have beefed that up. So really take advantage of those virtual opportunities to visit.
Thank you. I think that's good advice. Let's talk a little bit about test optional. We hear about it a lot. I would rather we talked about submission optional than test optional, because I think this is a policy that really puts students in the driver's seat. But I think we don't recognize that every part of your application is optional, right? Like taking hard classes, doing well in them, running for class president. Those are all things that some students take advantage of and others don't. So can you talk a little bit about what test optional means, and particularly in your perspective as an admissions reader, you read before the test optional movement was big, and you've read after, and tell us a little bit about that experience, if you would.
Absolutely. And I love submission optional, right? Because that truly is what it is. Take the test. People are like, oh, I have testing anxiety. That is true. My daughter has testing anxiety. Got it. But she's never taken the SAT. She's never taken the ACT. So take it, because this may be a test that you do great on. And practice, right? And so submission optional is the best term. Take it, because if you don't need it, then at least you have it. It's a horrible place to be where you're like, oh, I didn't take it. And I had some students who opted not to take it. And then they found out, oh, I want to add this school to my list. And they're not test optional. Not all schools are test optional. And so you don't want to come up, on the 12th hour wanting to add a school to your list, and they're requiring a test, and now you're scrambling to take it. Or some schools are test optional for admissions purposes, but not for scholarship purposes. And so having it and not needing it is so much better than needing it and having to scramble for it. Plus, I love that Ginger said is you are in the driver's seat. You may take a test and do great, right? But for certain schools, you may not want to submit it. In other schools, you do want to submit it. And so having that option, if they're not required, because if college is required, you got to submit it. But if it's optional, you can look at your score and base it off of the overall profile for that particular college, maybe for the major and what have you. You may have it and you want to highlight that you did great on a certain part. And so having the test and not needing it is so much better. What I have seen is, and don't do this, but if one piece of advice I can take away, I have seen students who will submit scores because they think they heard someplace, I don't know, having a score is better than not having a score. And that is not true if that score does not put you in the best light. And so I have seen students submit scores and say, well, this score is not indicative of who I am. Well, if you submitted it to me, I have to consider it, right? Because you submitted it. And so having that test score gives you more control to decide when you want to submit it and when you don't want to submit it, because sometimes that test score can help explain or help with the overall process, because it may be a great score. And now if it's a newer school that I don't know that much about and I see this strong test score, I know foundationally the information is there, the knowledge is there.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about what this means for students. And I asked you tonight to lean a little bit on your experience as a teacher and as a counselor to think about students in each grade and sort of what advice you might have, what things you want to emphasize for them as they're going through their process. So let's start with the 9th graders that are out there, or parents of 9th graders who are listening. What's your advice for them? What do you think their focus should be?
Ginger, this is about where I am in the process, right? And so my advice, my true advice, my strongest advice, Do not keep stressing your children out about the college process. They haven't even really gotten the high school part down. You don't want to make applying to college longer than the college process or the college itself, right? If you've already started as an 8th grader and you're like, oh, have you thought about this college? I was shocked and amazed, Ginger, when I went someplace with my daughter and someone started asking her what college she was considering. It's like, can she complete 9th grade, right? And so as the advice for a parent, and I'm that parent, I'm doing the research, but I don't need to let my daughter know every step of the research. And I'm taking notes, I'm paying attention as a parent. Does she like being in big groups? Does she like being in smaller groups? What type of teacher at her high school does she really learn from? Is she okay in the big classrooms, or does she thrive better in the smaller classrooms? As a parent, I'm paying attention to that so that when we start looking at colleges later on, I will know what type of learning environment is best for her. So start paying attention as a parent, but don't pressure the student. In fact, my daughter met with a teacher yesterday, and that teacher said this process, high school, college is like, well, her example was eating an elephant. She was like, don't eat elephants. So, but one bite at a time, you take it small pieces. And so that is, if nothing else, parents, please don't stress about the 9th grade, because what I did find, students who started stressing early in the 9th grade about college, when they became seniors and I met with them, they were like, Ms. Fulman, I want this over. I'm tired. And I'm like, no, let's explore. And they're like, nope, don't want to explore. I'm tired of hearing my parents. I'm tired of hearing aunts and uncles ask me about colleges. What's the quickest, fastest, easiest college I can get into it? And I'm done. And that's not where you want your student to be.
True. Okay, so sophomore year, the sophomore slump we know can happen. What advice do you have for students right in the middle of high school, particularly right now, right at the end of the year or getting close to this end of the school year? It really is that midpoint of high school. So any particular advice for them?
Stay focused. And this is going to be a hard piece of advice, but this might be academically where you start separating from your friends, because you may want to take a more challenging course load. And you're like, oh, but none of my friends are taking this class. Well, you can see them at lunch. You can see them. I still call them play dates. My daughter doesn't call them play dates, but whatever.
Hangout. You're allowed to call them hangouts. Just
hangout. Okay.
That's
I'm
what
like,
I was
oh,
told.
you're having a play date. And she's like, Mom. I'm like, and so you may separate from your friends because of your course offerings, and that's okay. That is okay. Choose the classes that best suit you and use the summer and use the time for programs. Find out what you like. You may like an internship, a job. Like if you're thinking, oh, I may want to become an engineer, or I may want to go into environmental sciences or studies. That sounds interesting to me. Find a 1-week program. And I know some people are used to say, well, that costs money. No, really doesn't. You can find a place and say, hey, I want to come and volunteer for 1 week. So many places will say, yes, we do like free volunteers. And so start to explore, and they don't have to be long, drawn out programs. They can be 1 week volunteer programs where you can just go and reach out to individuals. If you have a pediatrician, you may want to, it's a little dicey now with COVID, but depending on that pediatrician's office, hey, can I sit down? Can I just come in and, file and paperwork or interview you to see what you do? That's a way to start exploring.
I think that's great advice. Okay, I have a junior who tells me all the time, it is as hard as they said it was going to be. So what advice do you have for juniors?
Juniors, junior parents, this is really that deep breath time. It's that time where explore, go and visit colleges. And again, forget the sweatshirt types of colleges. I mean, you can go to those, but don't have it so caught up on it. Parents, another piece of advice, again, if you take nothing away, don't accidentally put down colleges, because you never know where your child or your child's best friend may end up. Colleges are very different than what they were when we applied. There are colleges that when we applied to college, the acceptance rate was 60%, right? Over half the students who applied were accepted. Those same colleges, acceptance rates are now down to 8%, 9%. And so I would sometimes hear parents say, oh, well, anyone can get into that college. And their child's best friend had just gotten denied, right? And so be very mindful on how we describe colleges, and making sure that we don't know where our own children may end up. My daughter asks me all the time, Mom, what's the best colleges out there? And I say, there are no best colleges, there are only great fits. And so paying attention to that, making sure that you are looking at deadlines and dates, because scholarships, major scholarship deadlines will sneak up on you and will be available right after you finish your junior year. So this is April now. So some major scholarship applications for you current juniors are going to open up like in July, June and July. So start looking at those scholarships. If you know you want to have merit-based scholarships. And yeah, classes might be a little bit hard, but challenge yourself, but make sure that it's okay, that if it's too much, that you're okay with stepping back as well. Getting to know your counselor at your school. So many times, oh, my counselor doesn't know me. Well, have you reached out to them? Have you emailed them? Have you asked them for a visit? Parents, Zoom is great. I have not been to my daughter's school yet. Zoom meetings, love them. And so reaching out, knowing that, and then yes, as a senior, senioritis is real. Just met with a senior the other day who was like, oh, how bad this college is, senioritis. Yeah, no, that's not good. And if you don't know what senioritis is, it's horrible. It is that disease where students are like, oh, I've gotten into a college, or oh, I'm a senior. This is my time to party and live life and just do everything except for study. Colleges still want to see your transcript. And there is a process called where some colleges will rescind. Now, I'm not saying if you go from an A to an A minus, but if you go from an A and then you're like, I'm living a life and making straight C's as a senior, yeah, don't do that at all. And right now, I'm actually reading transfer applications. And so I'm looking at those last year senior courses, and students transfer for a variety of reasons. You may get to your dream school and maybe family reasons. You may need to move closer to home, or the program, your area of interest has changed. So just keeping those senior grades strong, because you never know when you may need to go back and look at them. Apply to a range of schools. Like I mentioned, there are over 4,000 colleges out there. You can find a college that you love. And so highly selective, somewhat selective, where maybe 50% of the applicant pool gets in, maybe 75% of the applicant pool gets in. You want a lot of different colleges so that you ultimately can have choices, but you don't want to just throw a scatter shot and say, oh, what's going to stick? Do your research. And make sure you thank the counselors and the teachers for writing letters for you, because just as hard as you're working to get your transcript, those letters and recommendations are very important. And so thanking them, again, one, because it's just a nice thing to do, right? But two, what if you ultimately needed to transfer, or you need a letter of recommendation for a job or an internship, or for a variety of reasons? You want to make sure that people know that you're grateful. Pay attention to the deadlines. Check your email. I've had students who will say, I missed that interview for that college because I didn't know. Well, did they email you? Yes. Well, why didn't you know? I didn't check my email. Well, that's not an excuse. Well, that's an excuse, actually. It's not a reason. So pay attention. One piece of advice I used to give students is you may want to create an email just for college. And that is an email that your parents and guardians have access to as well, just to make sure that no email is being missed. when it comes to that process. Just a little piece of advice that could be helpful.
It's one of my favorites. I think it's a really good piece of advice because it's also allows families to practice the passing of the baton, right? This is at the end of high school is the time where we're letting our children start to be responsible for themselves, but you can't just like throw the baton at them. Expect them to catch it.
And there you go.
That's not how they do it in the Olympics. They're very careful about that pass. And so one of the ways that you can be really careful about passing responsibility is to share it for a little bit in that last year of high school. So that can be a good way to do that. So we're going to dive into questions in just a second. So keep the questions coming into the Q&A box. I promise we're going to get to as many as we possibly can. But I did want to mention an opportunity that we at Appleruth have coming up this weekend, which is a chance to test drive the SAT or the ACT. You can take a free practice test with us online or in some of our physical locations as well. And, you know, it really resonated with me, Sarbeth, when you mentioned your daughter having test anxiety and, you know, attacking that, right? Rather than avoiding the experience, because you don't want her to make a choice out of fear, right? You don't want her to avoid something because she doesn't know she could be awesome at it. And you wouldn't want her obviously to hold herself back from graduate and professional programs, right? And other opportunities down the road because she was afraid to give this a shot. So you can take a free practice test with us. The scores are not going anywhere. It's just a chance for you to see which test might be a better fit for you. And if standardized testing is a place where you want to invest some time and some resources, or if there are other parts of your application that you want to put more time and energy into. So we invite you to join us this weekend if that would be a good fit for you and where you are in the process. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing. I'm just going to look at your gorgeous face and we're going to take some of these questions that we've gotten from our audience. Lots and lots of good questions. So can you talk a little bit about the IB program? Some students go to high schools where they have an international baccalaureate curriculum. Some schools pursue the full diploma program. Other students kind of get to pick and choose from rigor. But if you can talk a little bit about the role that an international baccalaureate program plays in terms of that.
Okay, so yes, so some schools have the IB program and some schools don't. So first, let me say, if your school doesn't have it, think of me as Charlie Brown, you know, teacher 111, don't pay attention to this part. If your school has an IB curriculum program, what that is doing is a very prescriptive type of rigor. And it's a very much lockstep type of curriculum. And some students love that because there are classes like theory of knowledge, and it is a very lockstep program that wherever you go, no matter where school you attend, if the IB program, the curriculum is mirror image, and it is very, after you take the standard level, you take the higher level of a course. So it's a very prescriptive curriculum. Some students will say, I'm in the IB program, I don't want the full diploma because it can be limiting because it is very lockstep. So if you are into dance or art or visual art, or sometimes you want to go deeper into history and that prescriptive program doesn't allow it, then you may want to take one or two IB, but then you may take, I've seen a lot of students who would take some IB and some AP because they really wanted to diversify their classes. It is a choice. Talk to your counselor, but it is truly a choice. Don't feel that I have to do the IB, even though I'm so interested in dance or I'm interested in these classes that aren't in the IB program. I'm going to do the IB program because that'll look better for colleges. No. Do the classes that you enjoy and you can mix and match. Yes.
Awesome. Thank you. We have several questions about how do you figure out the selectivity of schools. When I was a college counselor, ginger math was likeliest plus possibles must be greater than or equal to reaches, right? That's a balanced list, right? So how do you know that a school is likely to admit you is kind of a 50-50 shot or maybe a little bit more of a long shot? How do you put schools in those categories, particularly in this test optional world where admissions at some of the selective schools, their ranges have gotten a little bit absurd. I think the last time I looked at Penn's, middle 50% range was like 35 to 36 on the ACT.
Yes.
Right. And so how can students, what are some of the resources students can use to figure out where a school fits in terms of selectivity for them?
Great question. And it has gotten really hard, right? In the test optional world, it has gotten hard. That's one reason test submission optional is the phrase we should use, because if you have a test, then you may say, hey, even though this range seems absurd, I'm in it. Let me go. I think that's where the diversity of colleges are going to really play a role, and not just applying to the same 5 or 7 colleges that your high school typically sends people to. And so really thinking outside of the box. That's why I like coming up with the list of attributes and then finding colleges to fit those attributes, just instead of saying, oh, I like these 7 colleges. You want to look and research. Every college will put out a profile. It talks about how many students are from the Southeast, the GPA. Again, that went back to our very first statement, right? The average GPA from every school. You can find that from almost every college will post that of their incoming class. Colleges looking at the profiles that they post of their incoming first year class in, what is this? This is April. So last month, it was every place. You could go to the college's websites and find their profiles. The catch with that is, when you see the profile, you don't want to say, oh, I'm in it. Yay, I'm barely made it. But I'm in it. You want some colleges where you're like, I passed that long time ago. Like I passed that as a 9th grader, which is great and fine, because if you love the attributes of that college, that's how you can find those. We used to call them foundation schools, which means foundationally you have everything that they're asking for and more. So it should be a clear admit. But I've talked to a lot of college counselors, and they're like, my student is waitlisted across the board. And I think that's because the schools that they applied to were so similar with their acceptance rates. And so really looking and stretching those college options is important.
I think that's all really good advice. I would add just looking at the common data set beyond just looking at the school's profile. So every college publishes their own profile of their incoming class. It's not always clear if they're publishing data about their admitted students or their matriculating students. Right. So the common data set, and you can Google it, just Google a school's name and common data set, and it should pop up. And there's someone whose job it is at every college or university to submit that data every year. They're human beings, they can make mistakes, but generally speaking, that data is pretty rigorously scrutinized. And if you go back a couple years for the schools that you're really interested in, you'll get, I think, a better sense of where that range really is than just looking at sort of a post-pandemic range when you had students who weren't able to safely take a test. They're, maybe a student trying to protect their health didn't want to go into an enclosed gymnasium, and that sort of thing, or they couldn't, there wasn't anywhere for them to test based on where they lived and things like that. So the data was very skewed, I think, during the height of the pandemic. And so being able to look back a couple of years also sort of helps create, I think, a little bit more balance. And generally speaking, if a student's scores are sort of at the midpoint of that middle 50% range that they publish or higher, then you'd probably do well to submit your scores. They're not going to hurt you in any way. If your scores are below that middle 50% range, there may be some reasons, some circumstances why you feel proud of that score and you want them to know about it. But it may be in your best interest to keep those scores private at those schools. And so that's back to what we talked about before in terms of making some strategic choices about submitting your scores to some schools and not to others, if and when you have the choice. Okay, let's talk a little bit about demonstrated interest. I know that this isn't something that Emory necessarily pays attention to, but we have some questions about how schools use it, how can students demonstrate their interest, how do colleges use it, and how do you find out if a college is going to use it?
Great question. And Ginger mentioned this at the beginning. I worked at a couple of different colleges. And one of the colleges I worked for, we looked at demonstrated interest. How can you find out? Ask. We would say it. It's like, oh, do you consider demonstrated interest? Yes, at the former college where I worked. The current college, Emory, we do not. In fact, I have that in my signature on my email. Emory does not consider demonstrated interest. So ask that question, keep a spreadsheet, know which colleges look at demonstrated interest. Some colleges look at it so much where they can even see when you open an email, right? If they sent you an email that you open it, how can you look at demonstrated interest? Easiest way. When I was a college counselor, I used to help students register for visits, like upcoming visits. And so I would go online and I would say, oh, here's how you fill out the form. One college, I did it, showed the student, forgot that I did it, because usually I would go back in and try to unregister, forgot that I did it, got an email and it said, thank you so much for the visit. I was like, oh, I didn't go, which means they didn't track if I attended. Another college, sometimes forgetful to unregister, emailed me and said, oh, we missed you at the visit. I was like, oh, so they track demonstrated interest. And so how do you know when you go to different programs, if they give you a form to fill out and say, hey, can you please fill out this form? They're tracking demonstrated interest, versus if some colleges are like, no, we don't have a form, go to the website. And so they don't. And so attending the virtual programs for colleges that track demonstrated interest, going in person if they are on your campus visiting them, that if the admissions office is on campus visiting, making sure that you stop by, because some colleges will track that as much as they will look at your extracurricular activities. The easiest way to find out, simply ask and keep a spreadsheet of which colleges say yes and which colleges say no, because the college reps are going to be very candid if they track it.
Absolutely. I do. I think that is such good advice, Sarbeth, is that admissions officers are rooting for you. They care about you. They want to get to know you, and they have no interest in subterfuge, right? They're not trying to misrepresent their school or themselves or the process. And so they really will answer those questions very genuinely and very honestly, and give you, I think, some really good advice about those sorts of things. They're human beings, and they care a lot about students, or they wouldn't work in education. So I think you can take advantage of that. And there is often a person who's like your person on the admissions side. So could you talk a little bit about sort of how different offices work with regional admissions officers and how students can get in touch with them? And shouldn't it be students and not just parents?
Always students. Love talking to the students. Yes, so a lot of colleges will have what's called regional reps, where we have assigned territories. It is so easy to find that out. Simply go to, for example, you go to emory.edu, you click admissions, you click visit, and it's like contact us or meet the staff. Almost every college has that. Davidson, WashU, like you just go and click it if they have them. Now, a lot of the larger, well, I wouldn't even say larger state schools, because some of the large state schools also have that. And you just go and see who covers your region. I've had New Jersey for 10 years at a couple of different, well, 2 different schools. So total of 10 years. So when students are like, oh, I attend this school, like, got it. Know what all APs are offered, know the restrictions for the AP offerings. I know about the math curriculum. I know that's a hard math teacher, got it. And so looking online, it's really helpful to contact your rep when you have questions, because that person, part of our job is to know that school. And so you don't have to do as much explanations. We have reps for, if you go to a school in South Africa, there's a person for that. And so knowing that colleges really invest in that, wanting to make sure we understand your school, and that way you can build that relationship with that person and not having to keep explaining your situation over and over again.
Thank you. That's really helpful. So we have a couple of questions about just transcripts and advice there. So if you could talk just a little bit about weighted versus unweighted GPA and how GPA and class rank and transcripts and grades, like, I know you call the British Museum and you have them bring in the Rosetta Stone so you can translate the hieroglyphics from every different school's transcript. So you're looking at transcripts from all over the world, right? Not just all over the United States. And what do you do in an admissions office to kind of to translate from those different schools the truth out of that? And are you looking just at things like GPA and class rank that are sort of the end result? Or are you looking at the process of like individual grades and individual classes?
That is a phenomenal question, Ginger. I used to be an attorney, so the answer is it depends, right? The truth is your transcript is typically given to us with a high school profile. So parents, guardians, students, if you don't have a high school profile, contact your high school, ask them for a profile. Typically it's online under the college counseling or the counseling office website. That profile is the guidebook to help us understand your transcript. It lets us know how many APs are offered at your school. Is there a limit on APs? Do you have to get permission to take an AP class? The extracurricular activities, it lets us know that. It lets us know if your school is rural versus inner city versus suburban. It gives us the information how large the senior class is. So that profile really is the guideline to help us understand the transcript. Well, does class rank matter? It depends. Some colleges I work for, absolutely not. We pay no attention to the class rank. Other high schools, yes. Other colleges, yes, we looked at the class rank. The key thing is keep in mind that a lot of schools don't rank. If your school doesn't rank, that's not a disadvantage. Your school just does not rank. And that is okay. We don't try to force a rank if it's your school's policy not to rank. And so looking at weighted versus unweighted. What is weighted? What is unweighted? Unweighted is your raw class. An A is an A is an A, right? If it's AP, if it's honors, if it's regular, an A is an A is an A. That's unweighted. Weighted is some schools will give additional points if you're in an honors class or an AP class. Which one does the colleges consider? It depends. At Emory, for example, we don't look at any GPA that's on your transcript. We go back and recalculate. Actually, at a couple of colleges where I work, we calculate the GPA on a standard 4.0 scale because some high schools are on a 4.0 scale, some are on a 5 point, some are 7 point, some 11. The high school I attended, we didn't give grades. We wrote narratives. Well, the teachers wrote narratives. I'm sure they love that. And so don't try to cross compare your transcript with any other high school, any other transcript. That's why we have regional reps and we pay attention to your school and your context, looking at your high school profile so that when we're looking at your transcript, we're understanding it from the right context.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Do you have any tips for students when they're visiting colleges? What should they be looking at? What activities should they do? Any questions they should ask?
Absolutely. Take advantage of the standard tour that the college gives. I think it's a real disservice when students say, or families say, particularly families, oh, I attended this school, I'm going to give my daughter a tour. I'm sure the same buildings and everything are not the exact same. Or even if you're like, oh, my best friend from kindergarten goes here now and I'm going to tour her, that's fine as a supplement. Take the official tour so that you can get the official information, because the tour is not just walking you from building to building. Those tour guides are also going to give you more up-to-date information that you can ask about different programs. So if you want to do the official tour, that's great. And then supplement if you know somebody else. So make sure you do that. Make sure you sit through the info sessions. Trust me, as a former college counselor who sat through probably close to 400 info sessions, they do run together. but still sit through them. You're not sitting through 400, hopefully, and take notes. I cannot tell you how many times students would come or families would say, oh, your school does X, Y, and Z. I'm like, no, we don't. That's the school 1 hour away. Did you visit us on the same day? Yes. So it's easy to blend information in. I used to tell students, before you leave off the campus, before you physically get in a car and leave off the campus, jot down notes. When I took my nephew on his college tours, we did that for every college before we left campus. Be engaged, ask questions, and then if you can, go have lunch in the student center to get a true vibe of just how the students' interactions. But take advantage of that tour. Get the most out of it, and info session.
Thank you. I think that's great advice. My my own child who has been doing some college visits has a little notebook and like gets in the car and pulls it out and pulls it out of pen and like, okay, I'm doing my list, mom, and has to write down 5 things that are cool and 3 things that are sketchy about every school before we leave campus, before it can be forgotten.
I love the sketchy part.
Every school has sketchy stuff. And so you gotta recognize that no place is perfect, because if you go in thinking it's perfect and then it rains, it rains at every college, I think. I mean, they don't put any pictures of rain on their website or in their brochures.
Wouldn't that be great?
I don't know what the university photographer does on rainy days, but I don't, they're taking pictures inside. But stuff happens at school that's not perfect. And so if you think it's only going to be perfect, you're bound to be disappointed when you're a college student. So the sketchy stuff up front, you know how to work around it, and you know whether or not you love the school enough to get over the stuff that's maybe not perfect. There's a student who's asking, the common application has space for 10 extracurricular activities. What happens if I have more? So can you talk a little bit about maybe not just that specific question, but also just how students present the things that they're interested in on their application and how you hope to receive that on the other side of things? Is a resume a good idea? Should they give the resume to the teacher who's writing for them? Should they send it with the application? All those things too.
Great question. Yes, only 10 activities with, I think it's 150 characters. So really be thoughtful on what 10 activities are the most important and list them in order of importance to you. If a college accepts a resume and you want to submit that, absolutely, but not all colleges will accept resumes or additional information. So be very thoughtful for listing those 10 activities. The benefit also is there's an additional information box. I used to tell my students, as a college rep who has to read thousands of applications, don't use that just to say, oh, well, here's my other 15 activities. How is those activities adding? One thing that a lot of students who are in theater, it's impossible to list all of the, if you're in theater, all of the activities in those 150 characters. You may want to say, see additional information to list out all of the additional plays and activities you've been involved in. So take advantage of the landscape. Think of the theme. What is the theme of my application? Or is my application just a clown car where I'm just throwing everything and seeing what's going to stick? So think of, what is the theme of my application? Is it a good idea to give your resume to your letters writers? Absolutely not. And the reason I say that is, maybe for your counselor, yes, because your counselor's letter is going to be the overall arching of who you are. Your teacher letters are really just about who you are in their classroom. So knowing that you are the captain of the football team or president or a captain of debate or any activity like that is not really helpful for an academic letter recommendation. What's more helpful is to email that teacher and say, here's what I enjoyed in your class. I was a teacher, I mentioned I taught history. When if I needed to write a letter, if the student wrote me and said, Ms. Fleming, when you taught this lesson about X, Y, and Z in history, it really opened my eyes. I was able to do additional research. That was great because I could put that in my letter recommendation, right? But if I'm writing a letter recommendation from the academic perspective and the student lets me know that they were the president of an organization, I'm just going to double what the counselor is already going to say. And so be mindful with who you give the letters of recommendation to, and also for the Common App. Supplemental essays, pay attention to your supplemental essays. Colleges, if a college asks for an additional essay, which is a supplemental essay, it is college specific, and you want to make sure that you're answering that question, because that particular college felt that that question was it was going to be helpful for their admissions process.
Thank you. That was all really helpful. As one person is asking very specifically about Emory and the admissions process sort of in this test optional space, do you think that students who submitted scores had an advantage over students who didn't? What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely not. That's my thoughts, and that's the true answer.
Remember what I told you about admissions officers are real people and they'll tell you the truth? That was true.
Yeah, no, they did not have an advantage over students who did not submit test scores. No.
Thank you.
Oh, and you can always, if it's an Emory specific question, because I know this is more general, please feel free. I'm literally the only Sarbeth in the world. So if you Google Emory University and Sarbeth, my email will come up if you have a very specific question about Emory, because I want to make sure that we're answering the bigger questions. Literally just email me.
Thank you. Any additional suggestions about summer activities? We talked about, I mean, certainly there are some students who do test prep over the summer because they don't have as many things going on. And there are some students who are going to visit colleges then, but what are some other suggestions and ideas of how students can use their summers wisely?
So this is just what I'm doing with my own, and I think it works. We split the summer into thirds. 1/3 of the summer, we are just going to have fun and do nothing and look at Netflix and catch up on Hulu and go to the beach and just hang out, right? 1/3 of the summer is going to be for some type of academic preparation for next year. If you, depending on how old you are, it could be test prep, it could be internships, research, and then 1/3, find something that you love and enjoy. So going to camp, that could be a 1/3 of the summer, which also could double for the academic piece as well. So one activity can play a role in more than one category. But make sure that you rest and relax, because you don't want to start next year burnt out. But then also you don't want to start next year where for 2-3 months you've done absolutely nothing academic, because that's going to be that summer melt and you're going to lose some information. And so having a healthy balance of, okay, I'm going to summer camp, I'm going to do internship, research, job, test prep, I'm finishing up this anime. Like, having a healthy balance is what you should do over the summer.
I love the a third. That's such great advice. I usually talk about the summer as like a recipe, and it needs like different ingredients, and your butt and the couch definitely need a date for some part of that summer,
Yes,
but that's
absolutely.
not all that should happen in the summer. So I love the way that you plan that. Sarbeth, I don't know if your daughter thanks you for it, but I do. I think that's a really good
She
approach.
does, because it helps with the structure, right? So that what I'm saying, do this academically, she knows she has just as much time to do absolutely nothing.
I love that. That's awesome. Okay, we're in our last minute, and we've tried to cover a lot of ground, and I'm grateful for the good questions we've gotten, and I'm sorry we haven't been able to necessarily address each of them individually, but trying to do our best. In this last minute, I want to give you a chance, Sarbeth, to sort of share with us kind of the last piece of advice that you want to leave families with tonight. Is there a resource you'd suggest? Is there a bit of advice, something you wish parents and students knew and understood about this process that seems to be kind of confused in the mix? What that one sort of juicy bit that you want to leave us with? I want to let you have the last word.
Yeah. I will definitely say, keep in mind that we work in the Office of Admissions. We want to admit you. We are very candid people. We've gone through the process ourselves. We are helping other people, family members go through the process. So we understand the anxiety and stress. around the college process. And so we want to help. Ask the questions. Let me back that up. Before you ask the questions, Google the questions on the website, on the college's website. Don't go, there are so many unreliable sources out there. Go directly to the colleges, ask the questions. Don't be afraid to ask the questions, and take advantage of all the virtual programs out there. If any family goes on a in-person tour or info session without looking at that college's virtual options, you're going not as prepared as you could be. So listen, put it on your phone, put it in your headphones, take a walk, just so that you can have, what questions you want to ask, right? And so take the process step by step. It is going to work out wonderfully. Every single person will end up in a place that they will love. And if they don't love, what I do want to say with that, one of my students came back and I was like, that is such a great point. She hated it her first year. She loved it her second year. So you may not love it instantly, but you're going to end up in a place that's going to make you grow. And that is what life is all about. Every single step is going to make you grow in life and learn. And so just take the process as a wonderful opportunity to stretch and grow and be somebody different that you weren't yesterday.
That's so beautiful. Thank you so much, Sarbeth, for sharing your good perspective and wisdom on this process. I'm grateful. I always love to get to spend time with you. And I thank you all for coming to watch us talk. We appreciate that. Thank you all for your good questions. You will receive an email that will give you a copy of the recording, or access to the recording, I guess probably on YouTube, and a copy of the slides if you'd like to have them. If you'd like to sign up for Appleruth's test drive this weekend, please feel free to visit appleruth.com, and we'll be glad to get you started. And I love all your advice, Sarbeth, but I love the idea of just having real faith and trust in yourself as a student, that there are good adventures ahead for you. And that is so exciting. The gift of education, the opportunity to spend time embracing those opportunities is so exciting. And I'm just delighted for the families that are watching, that you're supporting your children as they venture forward. There are so many good opportunities for them, and they're very fortunate to have you as their advocates and their guides. So thank you all for being with us. Have a great night.